Bonjour, namaste, shalom. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Prasun Roy, author of A Samurai Defense of Azad Hind, Rash Behari Bose. In this book, published by Vitasta, the author shines the spotlight on a legendary figure, Rash Behari Bose, perhaps the only freedom fighter anywhere in the world, at least that I know of, to have also invented a best-selling dish. Rash Behari, who was born in the small village of Subalda in Bengal, went on to become a leading figure in the Indian freedom movement. Some of his most outstanding achievements came after he escaped to Japan, where he gave the daring call, Asia for Asians. Prasunji, welcome, and thank you for taking the time for this interview.
Thank you so much.
I usually start with a simple question, which is, what's a 30 to 40-second elevator pitch of your book? How would you describe it to someone who has not read it yet?
Okay, so A Samurai Dream of Azad Hind is a biography of Sri Rash Behari Bose. And yes, he's a man, I would say, who had been dreaming of one dream right from the age of 10 years till his last breath, which was to get complete independence for his mother nation. And he did it throughout his life while he was in India, while he was self-exiled in Japan, where he later on became a citizen. And he was the man who gave the world's first voluntary army of a country's independence, which was the INA. And he was the visionary who could foresee Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose to lead that army to become the Azad Hind Fauj, which was one of the prime causes why we got our independence. So the entire journey of this man's life is unfortunately forgotten in our country. So please do read this book. It will give you a lot of insight about how these people led that mission.
You know that in these few sentences, you've already said many things that people would find very provocative and new, because that's the one side of the freedom struggle that they don't know much about. But let me ask you my second question. What motivated you to write a book about Rash Behari Bose? Most people don't know much about him. You are very young, so what got you interested in him?
So, I am an author by passion, and I work with a literary agency called the Bookmakers Literary Agency. So initially, my first two books were fiction books for children. And then I was willing to write something on the nonfiction side. And one thing that came to my mind was, the other side of the independence struggle, which we don't see in our country, which is the revolutionary movement. And when I look into that, and I saw that there was somebody who did a huge contribution to this entire mission, and he deserves a front seat among the leaders who got us our freedom. And that was Rash Behari Bose. And even in Kolkata, there is a road called Rash Behari Avenue, but many of us don't know that Rash Behari Avenue is not named after Rash Behari Bose. It is named after Rash Behari Ghosh. So the awareness is so less about a man who deserves to be known by the youth of today, I would say. You know, he was in Japan, and after he ran out of this country because he was being hounded by the British when the Ghadar movement failed. And he reached Japan as a fugitive. And in the next 2 decades, he became a statesman, and he's hugely respected in Japan. He was awarded the highest civilian award at the time of his death in Japan. But unfortunately, in India, we rarely know about him. We leave aside talking about him. We don't even know about him. So that was the impetus to write something about him, so that at least the younger generations are aware of the contributions that he had for us.
So, Prasunji, two observations here. When I shared the title of today's talk with my professor friends here, one of my friends who's from Calcutta said that there is a road named in Calcutta where she lived, And of course, she was referring to the Rash Behari Avenue. So now I will tell her that the road is not named after Rash Behari Bose. It is named after someone else. So even people from Calcutta, you see, you don't know
Yes.
as much about him. The second thing I wanted to observe was you mentioned the Gadar movement. And what I have learned over the last few years is there's not much awareness about the Gadar movement in India at all. And even in the West, like the US, where sort of it started and they sent the ship and everything, even here, there's not much awareness about the Gadar movement. So thank you for doing work that sort of brings this untalked about aspect to the forefront. But my next question is, what are 3 or 4 specific things you would want people to learn from this book?
Okay, so firstly, I would say that this book, even though it's a biography of Sri Raj Bihari Bose, I have tried to include the names and the deeds of people who were associated with his entire movement. And there are people who are even lesser known in today's world, but they had massive contributions towards our independence. So there are people like Shirish Chandra Ghosh, who was a childhood friend of Rash Behari Bose from Chandannagar, and he had been with him in this entire activity, despite he was in India. He was constantly helping Raj Behari Bose from wherever he was. There is Amarendranath Chatterjee, who was a fund collector for the Jugantar of Bahajatin, who was a very good friend of Raj Behari Bose when he was in Dehradun. So there are names, numerous names. For example, Sachindranath Sanali is there. So all these people are very less talked about today. So you would find a lot of mentions about these people in this book. That is one thing. Secondly, I would definitely say that there is the creation of the INA, how it happened, how Rash Behari Bose would convince the entire Imperial Japanese army to accept it as an independent army of independence, in contrary to the notion which the British tried to spread at that time, that it was the pet army of the Japanese. Because after the fall of Singapore, which was, a biggest showdown of the British, and the largest prisoners of wars were taken out of the Indian soldiers, they wanted to hide that shame, and the Raj Behari Bose made an army out of it. So that is something which you get to know about the INA and their deeds. We see the connections between Rash Behari Bose and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, and how the two of them led this transition happened, and how Netaji took it forward, and what was the after effect of the INA, the Azad Hind Fauj, and whatever Netaji did with that army. So that is there over there. Thirdly, I would say the contributions of Japan, the contributions of the Japanese people and the society in the life of Rash Behari Bose, which slowly made him into the statesman that he became. He was called a sensei of the teacher over there, because he later on became a teacher, a journalist, while he was working on this mission for the Azad Hind Fauj. But he was hugely respected over there. So all these facts are there. So these are the 3-4 major takeaways that I would say that you would get from this book.
I'm going to ask a slightly personal question here. You are from Bengal. When I read your book, and I read a couple of other books recently, I realized how much contribution Bengal made to the armed revolution in India. But we never hear about that growing up. I'm in my 40s. I never heard about that much even after I was growing up, even after I had grown up. You only hear about Tagore and Satyajit Ray and sort of the educated sort of intelligentsia when it comes to Bengal. Why do you think this aspect of Bengali history is not talked about much? This aspect of revolutionary movement?
Yes, because there were many of these revolutionaries who were part of something called the Anushilan Samiti at that time. The Anushilan Samiti was the hotbed of revolution at that time. it created so many of these heroes who later on became idols for the heroes who came after them. So the entire chain of revolutionary movement to get India a freedom in the way of 1857, the uprising that happened. So that was something which many of these people did, but these people, they were not self-promoting. It is kind of a marketing. You are a professor of marketing, I would say. It's like they never wanted to self-propagate about themselves. They did what they did, and they did it for their nation. So it is unfortunate that later on, the Bengal society, the people of Bengal, stopped speaking about all these people. There were different reasons behind it. There were political reasons, there were social reasons. Many things were happening at that time. So these people, the followers of these people changed their allegiances later on. And that is where they stopped talking about them. So that is what happened. There were followers of even Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose who changed allegiances and they started speaking against him. But these are people who are lesser known. Some had to, run away from the country, just like Rash Behari Bose had to, and they could never return. They had to change their names just for the sake to remain anonymous at that time. So that is something I would say that is the prime reason why all these heroes from Bengal are very, very less known.
Before I ask you my next formal question, as a Bengali, would you say you feel proud of people like Rash Behari Bose?
Yes, I do. I do feel.
So in India, we do not have a very deep tradition of biographical books on historical figures. Would you agree? Why do you think that is the case?
Yes, I do agree. That is something I would say, biographical books on historical figures. The earlier books were mostly written by people who had a colonial mindset. So most of our history are written by the imperial rulers only. So it's in history, like the people who made us, subdued, they only wrote our history. And the later generation of Indian historians, they were also very, very inclined towards this colonial mindset. So there are books which says about, there's a book called Terrorism in Bengal, which talks about all these revolutionaries. But I would say, why do you call it Terrorism in Bengal? It's an early 1920s book. So terrorism is something different. You are not a terrorist. If you look at the freedom fighters, the definition of terrorism is completely different. They should be called the heroes of Bengal and India. So that is the mindset, I would say. Secondly, in recent times, if you look, there are publishers, there are authors who are writing numerous books in India. India is mostly, I think the biggest market where books are written over here. And there are biographical books, but if you look at historical figures, if you have one book in the name of one of these persons, a publisher or an author would be reluctant to write a second book on him. So that shouldn't be the case. There should be more works, because if I'm writing on Rash Behari Bose, there can be another person who can write many other things on him also. The more we write, the more enriched that history becomes. So that mindset needs to change also, even today when we are in 2022, that mindset of the industry, of the publishing industry, of the writing industry, that should also, I think, need a paradigm shift that way.
I'm very happy that India has business owners and entrepreneurs like yourself who are so aware of these things. Not a year goes by in America when a new book on George Washington doesn't come out. And so, that speaks to what you were saying, right? In India, you have one book on one figure and people think, well, why do we need a new book? But that's how you enrich the body of knowledge about these historical figures. So let me ask you my next question. What is your most favorite episode about Rash Behari Bose in this book? Can you share it with our audience?
Yes, I would. There are, a couple of episodes over there which are part of my favorites, I would say. that if you look at his deeds, the two of his major deeds that gets little bit talked about is the Ghadar movement, where he led the revolution in India in 1915, and the part where he did the bombing on Lord Hardinge. Now, these were two incidents, but the planning, the execution, which were the places where he was staying, the way he camouflaged himself, and he was roaming around either in a burqa or dressed as a Sikh, or he's going out on the street, meeting the policeman as a priest. So all these aspects over there makes it, kind of very interesting. So I could find all this data in the National Archives and the National Library documents which are there. So getting all those facts down, and when you read them in the chronological sequence, it's so very interesting. Like there's an episode when Rash Behari Bose, after bombing Lord Hardinge, he fled back to Dehradun, and he became very verbose about that the incident shouldn't have happened, this is so bad, and like that. So he was camouflaging. And a few months later, when Hardinge went back to Dehradun to recover his health, that time the British society over there thought that Rash Behari Bose was such a big supporter of the British that he was invited to the circuit house to meet the viceroy at that time. So all these deeds of his in the parts, smaller parts of this book are very, very interesting.
And you write about the Forest Institute in Dehradun, and I have been there, I've taught there, but there's not even one memorial to Rash Behari Bose there, not even a sign that says
Yes.
Rash Behari Bose lived there. So that is unfortunate, don't you think?
That is very unfortunate, and many people don't know that the Forest Research Institute that we have today is the new building. The earlier building where Rash Behari Bose used to work is the current Doon School in Dehradun. So they donated it to the Doon School. The building of Doon School was the FRI of Rash Behari Bose's time.
That is amazing. I did not know that. I have been to that Doon School as a guest of one of the staff members. And again, no memorial, no sign, not even anything that talks about Rash Behari Bose. So I am going to ask my friend to see if they would host a talk on their campus by you, because it seems relevant given that was where he lived for so many years. But moving on, you did so much research about Rash Behari Bose in this book, right? So can you share with us one story that did not make it to the book?
Okay, so the research on Rash Behari Bose has a lot of information. So there are loads of information which are available. There are loads of information which aren't available, which are there in various archives of India, of Japan, of Singapore, like communications between Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and Rash Behari Bose. There were episodes where when he reached Japan, he was in connection with the Ghadar party members who were still in Japan. They were hiding over there. And while he was trying to coordinate with the German Foreign Office to, smuggle arms through the China way to India, at that time, he met many people. There was M.N. Roy of Bagha Jyotin's team who had traveled to collect the arms on behalf of Bagha Jyotin for the Christmas Day plan. And he traveled to Japan and met Rash Behari Bose over there. There was a meeting between Rash Behari Bose, Bhagwan Singh Gyani, and Sun Yat-sen, the first president of the Provisional Republic of China. So there was a meeting between the two of them at that time in Japan in the 1900s, 15s. So those are certain episodes which are not covered in this book because of the chronology I was following, because there are numerous such incidents which needed to be included.
Be coming with another book on this topic, or you will move on to other historical figures?
I am in touch with the Japanese consulate also, and I'm in talks with the consul general if we can get some of his works, his personal diary in Japanese is perhaps there in their archives. There are communications which happened between him and the others. So those are very interesting content which can be taken up, translated, and made into a very, very meaningful book of our history. So that is something which is there in my mind, but it needs a lot of bureaucracy to get through that. And I'm working on certain other historical figures of our independence. Let's see how it turns out to be.
So before I ask my next question and observation, I found it amazing that here's this guy who is not very educated, goes to Japan because he has to flee India, and then learns Japanese, which is one of the most difficult languages to learn. And in fact, is writing as a journalist in Japan. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, yes. And when he reached Japan, he had the knowledge of just 4 Japanese words at that time. And he landed in Japan and he was constantly hiding here and there. And later on, when he was there and he was attending a session of all the Japanese delegates over there, along with Lala Lajpat Rai, the British became very aware of their presence over there, and they started to do a manhunt, and he had to go into hiding. And once he went into hiding, he was taken into the household of Mr. Aiso Soma and Koko Soma, who were the owners of the Naka Muraya bakery over there. And he was hiding in the attic, and for months, not meeting anybody. The communications were happening only through paper chits. That is where he started to dedicate his time, and it needs so much of mental strength to do that. You're hiding completely, and you are learning a new culture and a new language, and that is where his excellence, I would say, had come out. And later on, the Japanese that he wrote and the Japanese culture which he adopted even made Rabindranath Tagore tell to one of his fellows that when he was traveling to Japan, he said that go and meet Rash Behari Bose. If you want to learn about the Japanese culture, you should meet him because he's the best person to guide you in that way.
That is amazing, right? I mean, learning the Japanese language, becoming proficient and becoming, writing for sort of the Japanese people. But let me ask you my next question. Do you find that people in your family, in your friend circle, other Indians in general, are adequately aware of the heroes who contributed to our freedom struggle?
I think there is a narrative, which is the popular narrative of the Indian independence, which is known mostly by the people of our country. The alternative narrative, which has a more significant role to play, that is very, very less talked about. And I would say from childhood, we are reading a history which is totally different from what this history talks about the revolutionary leaders, the heroes, starting from Bahajatin, Aurobindo Ghosh, Rash Behari Bose, to the formation of the INA, to Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, and how the INA led the entire mission. The only army which didn't surrender in the Second World War. And that is something which is very less written about. And that is why I think which is very less talked about. These people, some of these people have been treated as, okay, they are very respected. Let's make them as deities. So, and keep them at a corner of the room. But unless they become a part of our popular culture, unless the students of a university wear a T-shirt with the image of Rash Behari Bose, something like that. So that is something which is very important. Coming into the popular culture, putting it through across the youth, then only it can become more and more effective, I would say.
So do you think that Indian freedom fighters are adequately covered in our schools and colleges? Did you find that adequate coverage when you were growing up, when you were going to school? I'm assuming you went to college.
Honestly,
so did you find that?
Honestly speaking, if you read our history books that we refer in our schools have, like I said, covered only one part of the movement, which is the Ahimsa movement. I would say Netaji was not a very Hinsa-prone person, or Rash Behari Bose was not a very Hinsa-prone person. They also believed in Ahimsa, but they didn't believe that Ahimsa can get you the freedom that you deserve. So that was the ideology of the entire armed revolution, organized armed revolution, which began in the early 1900s, 1902, 1905, and then it went on into generations, which later on continued until the independence happened at that time. So this chain is broken. That is the missing link, which is not there in our history books that we teach our children. So we are programmed to understand the history of our independence in a certain way, which is inclined towards one direction. The other direction is uncovered. That is where the chain is not complete. So I think that needs to be talked about. It needs to be written about. And schools and colleges and the government, I think that is the most significant support which any author would need to put this thing into the school syllabus.
And Prasunji, I have to say that in some way, ignoring the contribution of people like Netaji Bose, or after reading your book, Rash Behari Bose, almost seems like saying we don't need to learn, Americans shouldn't read about George Washington because it was an armed revolution. And, we don't like that, right? So that sort of is what got me thinking. But even on the other side, like even on the Ahimsa side, I don't think we know as much as we think we do. I recently learned only yesterday or day before that there is a museum to Lala Lajpat Rai in Jagrao, which is a small town in Punjab. And I am from Punjab. I've been to Jagrao many times. Nobody ever told me, about the museum. And not many local people even know about it.
So it's like unfortunate that other than Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru and a few others, very less is spoken about any of these leaders. So, when there was a Gadar Day, which got celebrated a few days back, and I was talking to one of distant family members of Rash Behari Bose, she was saying that the names of every other person was told in that ceremony, and Rash Behari Bose's name was not told in that, despite him being the leader. So there, in the 75 years celebration of the independence of India, there are parks which are getting named after various freedom fighters. There is a park in the name of Basanta Biswas, who threw the bomb for Rash Behari Bose on Lord Hardinge. A park is named after him also, I believe, but there is nothing in the name of Rash Behari Bose anywhere in this country.
That is sort of the unfortunate side of our history, right? Now, let me ask you my next question. But before I do that, let me remind the audience that they are welcome to raise their hand in Zoom and ask questions or type their questions in the chat box. We definitely want questions from the audience, because no one, neither Prasunji or I, will claim that we have thought about everything that needs to be discussed about Rash Behari Bose. So, but my next question is on a different track. Rash Behari Bose, freedom fighter, I get it. But you also talk about the Naka Muraya curry that he invented. Can you elaborate this for our audience? A freedom fighter who's also a inventor, chef?
So I would say, yes, that's another different angle to his life. So he was married to the daughter of Isusoma and Kokosoma, the people who were sheltering him in their house. They got married in 1918, and his wife passed away in the year 1924. And she was a Japanese lady who, could have got married to a very distinguished Japanese family, but she chose to marry a revolutionary just to shield him, to become a living flesh shield of the Indian in exile. So that was a very, very close family association which Rash Behari Bose had with the Soma family. And after his wife passed away, his children were, groomed by his mother-in-law and his father-in-law. And the bakery was their family business. And Rash Behari Bose, did another revolutionary activity in the culinary side, I would say, because in Japan, at that time, curry meant English-styled curry. So the curry has its origin to India. And why should we taste a colonial version of the curry? So let's make it into the Indian version of the curry. That's why it is still known as the Indo curry. And the company became so popular that it was the first restaurant to be registered on the Tokyo Stock Exchange at that time. So publicly listed company at that era. So such was the popularity. He was not a chef, I would say. He invented the concept and he gave that cuisine to the Japanese society, and they just loved it. So that was another, different kind of revolution, I would say.
I have to ask, have you tasted the curry?
No, I haven't been to Japan. If I, get to visit Tokyo someday, the restaurant is still there at the Shinjuku railway station. You get down from the elevator and you can still find it over there. And they still serve the Indo curry to this day.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to someday going to Japan and trying it out myself. So thank you for sharing that with us. Now, one of the biggest contributions of Rash Behari Bose that you mentioned in the book is the founding of the Azad Hind Fauj, which he then handed over to Subhash Chandra Bose. And in the book, you say that Rash Behari Bose knew that the Fauj needed a younger leader. He was already, way past his prime in terms of age. But can you explain this to our audience?
Absolutely. So it was the time when there was this episode which was called the Fall of Singapore, which happened. Fall of Singapore was a historical event, I would say, because in the world, it was known that the British army was invincible, and the Japanese just eroded away that particular notion by defeating the British very badly and taking in the world's largest prisoners of wars at that time. And all those people were in the camps where the POWs used to stay. And Rash Behari Bose was always waiting for an opportunity to do something drastic, because he had built Asia for Asians, that slogan, into the Japanese society, into the Southeastern society. So as part of the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, I would say, he gave this proposal to the Imperial General Headquarters of Japan that get me this, army. I would talk to these people and ask them to join into an army, a voluntary army for India's independence. So you don't have to remain a POW. You can become an independent army. And that was a time when the British got hell scared, I would say. And they started to propagate across Indian radios that Japan is making a pet army. And Rash Behari Bose is the Japanese. He's trying to, trying to mediate that. So he was doing this thing in a very, very large scale. And think about this thing, that the POWs who were there in the army of the British India, they were inspired by the words of the Congress, of the biggest leaders of the Congress, to join that army at that time. So when the word is coming from the other side that this is going to be a pet army, so they are questioning Rash Behari Bose about his loyalty towards India. So Rash Behari Bose has to convince these people, and he has to convince Japan that, okay, these are the people who were your enemies. Now I want them into an army. You give them an equal status so that they can fight side by side. That was a tremendous job. And his health was breaking. He was getting older. And he knew that to, have the allegiance of all the POWs to remain strong so that they can go to war hand in hand with the Japanese, they need a very, very magnanimous leader. And that was one name which came to his mind, which was definitely Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. And when Netaji came over and he handed it over to Netaji, he was happy that this is being led by the only man possible who could do this thing. And later on, we know that the World War II ended, Japan surrendered. There's a mystery behind where Netaji went away after that. He had to, because of certain reasons. And the INA never surrendered, I would say. That is what led the British to fear that let's do something drastic against this army. So they did the INA trials later on. When they were doing the INA trials, they did it at the Red Fort. Why a public trial for an army in their own country? They wanted to put a fear into the hearts of the people that see what we do to our enemies. But it turned out to be something else. The INA and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose became idols for every young generation of our nation. In their houses, they were being worshipped. There was a mutiny in the Navy. There was a mutiny in the Air Force. There was mutiny everywhere. And the British understood that what if the INA gets regrouped? What will happen? What if Netaji comes back someday? And everyone will, jump into that wagon. So that was something which had a massive effect, because the British knew that not the bureaucrats or the army, but the families of the British who were in India were at risk of this uprising. If the INA becomes regrouped, if Subhash Bose comes back. And all this was a brainchild of Rash Behari Bose, who had visualized this thing early in 1925 when he formed the Indian Independence League. This was there in his mind from that time. And that is where it is, a thread, an invisible thread, which connects the whole revolution, I would say.
Yeah, it is amazing how this guy who is living in a foreign country, exiled away from, the country he loves so much, can come up with these ideas to create the Indian Independence League and to create the Azad Hind Fauj, and then not only come up with the idea, but also implement it in practice. That is what sort of I was impressed when I read your book. So again, I'm so glad you bring this to public awareness. As you said, the mutiny in the Navy, the trials, there's really no literature that exists about these things. And
Yes,
we need more information, more knowledge about these things, more awareness. But let me get to my next question. There's an interesting trend in India these days, which is that our film industry comes up with movies that present some historical figure, whether it is the Marathas or or any other figure for that matter, right? Bajirao Mastani, all these figures that come
Akbar,
up. Yeah. Akbar, of course, is a popular favorite of them. And our people think that they watch this movie and they are going to learn about that aspect of Indian history. Do you think that Indian film industries are doing justice to the Indian freedom struggle? Do you think they are able to teach, create awareness, help our kids learn about what really happened during the freedom struggle?
I would say no, because, if you look at movies, like you said, Bajirao Mastani or Jodha Akbar, that is also...
Prithviraj.
Yeah, so those are very, very commercialized aspects with dance and songs and all that, and even portraying a character in a certain way. Like I would say Akbar had different shades to his character. This is not just the character which we see. If you read the real history of Akbar, the emperor of the Mughals. So that is only a partial history which they are showing to make it more commercialized. It's very unfortunate. How many movies do we have on even Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose? We don't. There should be more. There should be hundreds. And they should be of a magnitude which is like that of a Jodha Akbar. Look at the budget of the movies which exist now. There is a Bengali movie which is there on the works of Anuj Dhar and Chandrachud Ghosh, which is called the Gumnami. But there is no movie which got later on into the national language. It never became a Hindi movie or a Bollywood grosser. No, that is where we are lacking, I would say. There are narratives of, if you say Indian history, even the first Kashmir war, which happened right after the independence, that is something which is not covered in the army's history of India. That was the first, the experience of the Indian army to fight in the mountains, which gave them that knowledge of how they can, work in those terrains. So that story is also not covered anywhere in our, movies that we see around us. So there's the war of the World War I and World War II, the Indian soldiers who contributed over there. So many of these things are not there. The budget, I would say, of the Bollywood industry, which is huge, they should, channelize a part of that budget to highlight these stories. These would definitely become, best blockbusters, I would say, because the youth needs and they want to know about it.
Yeah, I've watched the movie Bose a few times, that, the Hindi movie Bose. And I have to say that every time I watch it, I'm left dissatisfied with what it could have been and what it ended up being. It could have been much better than, it was okay. It wasn't bad, but it certainly was not the scale I was expecting, given sort of, Bose's stature. And of course, about 2 or 3 weeks back, we had a guest speaker we were hosting in this conversation, Nitin Sathe, and he has written about Indian war histories. And even the first Indian Paramveer Chakra that went to one of the Indian majors who fought in Congo. No awareness, no knowledge in the public about, these achievements. So yeah. But let me ask you my next question. What has been the reception to your book after it came out? Was it what you expected?
Yeah, I would say my expectations were not very high, because Rash Behari Bose is a name which is totally wiped out from the active memory of Indians, I would say. That is where it was a big challenge. But when I got the book released, that time and till today, I would say there has been a very, very good youth response across the country. There are students of colleges, of IITs who reach out to me. They ask for more on this topic, and this reception is mostly, I would say, amongst the younger generation. And there is a fact, in fact, there's a part of the earlier generation also who are in their 60s. They are also very interested to know, because they haven't found any book on their hero when they were young. So these are the two segments, I would say, where I have seen a lot of interest. But the problem that we face is to keep this interest going on. We are a country of 1 billion. And, there are colleges, there are students who are very interested, but to generate a mass interest is something which would make his tag being removed of an unsung hero. If you want to remove this tag, more needs to be spoken about Rash Behari Bose, about his contributions, about the INA, which he, visualized, and he made it into a truth, which gave us our freedom. So that is the contrast, I would say. There is a good reception, but there is a part of the reception which needs more to be propagated amongst the youth.
Now, how long did it take you to write the book? You are an entrepreneur in the family business, right? So I'm assuming you have your plate full anyway with work. How did you keep yourself on track and motivated? How long did it take you? How did you keep yourself motivated?
It took me time, because that was the first biographical work I was doing. And the challenge was there was not much content available easily on his life. So if you say about the Gadar movement, you can find a Wikipedia page on Gadar movement, but you won't find the intricate dates, the places where he was hiding. He was there in Varanasi and he changed his residence 3 times. The 3 different places where he lived. One was in Bangali Tola, one was in Misir Pokhara. So there were so many names, places, people associated. That data is there in very, very older books, in very, archives of Indian archives in the national libraries. So I had to dig up these data, and a major part of the book got written during the lockdown. So there was a challenge of, accessing materials at that time, but somehow we took our time. The idea was to get the book into a form which would interest the younger generation once more, I would say. So there is a very non-fiction narrative which is coming out, but it is being told in a fictional tone where we have taken a liberty and put in words into the mouth of the characters. So it can be read as a thriller book also. So like my son is 9 years and he's kind of happy to read this book also. So that is something I would say.
So I'll repeat my question though, because I think you sort of sidestepped it. How long did it actually take you to write the book? How long? 1 year, 3 years?
It was like 2 years and before publication.
Okay. And you mentioned your son. And my question to you is, your son is at an age where he's impressionable, right? You mentioned 9 years. Given your awareness now about what happened during the freedom struggle, Rash Behari Bose, are you teaching him about these aspects of the freedom struggle? Because the schools and colleges, as we discussed, are not going to be able to do justice to that, right?
That is true. That is true. So yes, he kind of loved the cover of this book, and when he read, he's a very avid reader. And one day I gave him the book and I said, "You read it. Anything that you don't understand, ask me." So when he reads about the names of some of these people who were doing so many different things, so that is where I explained to him what were their contributions. So, what he's reading in school and what is not being taught in schools together should, his sense of the correct history of our country.
Right. Which is very complicated, right? Which is very complex, not as straightforward as people.
History is never black and white. History is, has different shades to it. So that is something, the next generation also needs to appreciate and know.
Right. So now my next, the next few questions to you are the closing questions, because we are getting close to finishing time. Who are the authors who've inspired you in your journey as an author? Any authors that you would like to share with our audience?
Okay, so I would say that my liking for writing began when I read two very significant people. I would say one is R.K. Narayan and the other one is Ruskin Bond. So when I was in school and I was not very keen on reading books, and my parents were like, "You should read. That would make you, more knowledgeable." So I started to pick up these books, and when I read them, their language was simple, and they had an impact which is very, very deep on anyone at that age if he or she is reading it. So that is where, the expression of something in a way, in a language which is understandable to everybody, that is something which, engrossed me, I would say, in their writings. So they are one of some of my biggest inspirations to put my hands and try writing as a genre.
Okay. And what books are you reading these days?
I would say, there are a few historical related works that I am working on right now. So there is a book called Tagore Alive by Krishna Kriplani. So he was the grand son-in-law of Rabindranath Tagore, who interacted very closely with him. So I did, get a copy of his book to know more about Tagore as a person. There's a subject which I'm working on lesser known Indian rulers of various places like Kashmir, Rajasthan, the Rajputana. So there is Rajat Rangini of Jona Raja, which has been, converted into, translated into English by Juvesh Chandra. So I procured a copy of that, which is a very interesting take. That book is not very known, but it has such a nice depiction of another part of history that we are not aware of. So I'm referring to these. There are books on Baha Jatin. One is by his grandson Prithindranath Sashji. He had written it in a different language, but a translated, abridged version of it is available in English. There are Bengali books on the revolutionaries. I had procured a few copies which are not into publication. So when you order them online, they would give you a bunch of photocopied pages just bound together. But that has so much of interesting information to them. So these are some of the unconventional reads, I would say, that I'm reading right now. But I would again tell you that there is a lot of literature, fiction and non-fiction, that has been written by people of today. The literary agency I work with, the Bookmakers Literary Agency, they have so many authors associated with them, and each one of them is doing such a fantastic job. There are so many books curated by the bookmakers, and all of them have so many different narratives, so many different perspectives of people. So we should try reading about the unknown authors also. In India, we only read the known authors. You go to a bookstore, you'll go and search for somebody whom you know already. But I would say try the other Indian authors who are there. They have a very, very important story to tell also.
So Sunji, one lesser known Indian author that I would highly recommend is the author of Rash Behari Bose, Azad, Hind. I found the book very informative. I learned a lot, I have to say. But let me, you mentioned Bhaga Jatin, and I know, of course, that we are not experts in Bhaga Jatin, but to our audience, can you maybe describe him in one or two sentences, given that I have recently come to learn that this Bhaga Jatin guy was one of the heroes of the Indian freedom struggle, and one never hears about him.
Yes, because at that early stage of the revolutionary movement during the 1905s, Bhaga Jatin was a man who established connections with the Germans, and the German crown prince promised to send him arms, and he planned to attack the British from the side of Bengal, to capture Bengal with the help of the German arms and the German army, and then get into the rest of the country like the 1857 uprising. And there is a very unknown fact that by a Czechoslovakian author who had once said that E.V. Voska was a spy at that time who had leaked about this plan to the British. And that is when Bhaga Jatin got martyred in 1915, just before his plan was getting executed. And that author writes that, if that treachery wouldn't have happened and Bhaga Jatin could do what he wanted to do, then he would have been named the father of the nation. And Mahatma Gandhi would never be known because Mahatma Gandhi was not there in India at that time. So such was his stature. And he was one of the leaders who all the other people used to idealize, starting from Netaji, Subhash Chandra Bose to Rash Behari Bose to everyone. So he was one of the proponents of that entire movement. But he's very, very less known, I would say, across the country. I found a lot of research material on him, mostly in Bengali, like I said, has photocopied papers stapled together. So I'm trying to put together a research-based work on him. let's see how it works out.
And for the information of our audience, Bhaga Jatin got his name Bhaga Jatin because he killed a tiger with his bare hands. So this was a guy who was physically very strong and brave. And so anyway, what is the next book you're working on?
So there are a couple of books that are lined up for me. Like I said, this research work on Sri Bhaga is something which is there on my plate. I'm working on that. There are a couple of others which would be released this year. For example, there are a few translation works that are going to come out of very less known Bengali stories, but those are such highly potent stories which can even become a web series of today, I would say. So these are, kept in small corners or libraries which are not yet visited even today. So those stories can be translated into English so that it gets a larger audience and people can know these stories. So that is something I'm working on. There are 3-4 other subjects that would get revealed on my Facebook page very soon. So hopefully we would have some interesting content for our readers in this year and the year coming ahead.
So Prasunji, I'll definitely be connecting with you on Facebook because I want to be among the people who know what you are coming out with. But last question, I promise, I have to ask you this. You are working in the family business. My general impression of Indian business people is that they're busy making money and, enjoying their flashy lifestyle. But you are taking out all this time that is almost like a full-time author. How do you balance? How do you manage your time? And what does your family think about this?
I treat this as a passion for me. It's like after the whole day into the work of various business activities, this is something which kind of refreshes my mind. And my family is based out of Kolkata. So most of the time when I'm in Kolkata, I try to spend it with my family. But like we were discussing, that my factory is in Baroda, so Vadodara, Gujarat. So our manufacturing unit is there. So a significant part of the month I spend over there. So during those times when I'm alone, that time I utilize mostly the free time, to do my research, to do my writing, and it's a passion, so it comes out.
Yeah, I have to admit that managing time like that and living two professional lifestyles, as an entrepreneur in the family business and as an author who's coming out with multiple books and then managing a family, I am impressed by your team, your time management. That is amazing. So on that note, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. I highly recommend the book.
Please to read Samurai Dream of Azad, Hind. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prasunji, and I hope that our paths will cross again sometime. Bye-bye.
Absolutely.